Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anson Evaluate Lockdown Light at the End of the Tunnel webinar. I am very pleased to be joined by my three panelists, Jay Bharani, Peter Wright, and I'm Stephanie Boyce. And you will get to listen to them more in just a second, but I'd like to just introduce you to what this is. These free webinars that I've been putting on, I'm going to be putting on from Anson Evaluate, are to help the legal profession, to help give you the tools and the answers to hopefully the questions during this time of crisis and beyond. It's something that I've done for years, and I want to continue doing it. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's helped contribute to these, and also wanting to know what everyone is going to want to hear over the coming weeks, because these will be happening from now on, hopefully. As long as you guys need me, we'll be here with those. In terms of what light at the end of the tunnel is, I'm not saying that we have all the answers here within an hour. Obviously, we're not going to be able to answer all your questions, but we're going to give you a start. And the light is that we're here for you, and that when you ask the questions, we will find the answers for you, hopefully. We know that a lot of you are frustrated, a lot of you are struggling, and we want to be here to help you. So without further ado, though, I would like to introduce my first panelists, and that is Stephanie Boyce. She's the DVP with the Law Society, and she will be talking about what the Law Society has been doing and can do for all of you. Stephanie, on to you.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. I shall try and avoid using the word unprecedented to describe the situation we all find ourselves in today, as to do so seems redundant. We have all been affected in a number of ways by the virus and the restrictions that have been implemented to keep us safe, and Law Society members are no different. Our members face some of the same challenges as everyone else, from to keep themselves, their employees and their clients safe, to how to keep their businesses viable as work dries up, and to dealing with the physical and mental impact of the lockdown. We know, however, that many solicitors and firms, and in particular, those smaller size firms, have specific needs and vulnerabilities that have been highlighted by the current crisis. The impact the partnership structure has had on their eligibility for financial support, the soaring costs of having to renew professional indemnity insurance, the continued burdens of regulatory compliance, and more. Firms in sectors such as criminal legal aid work and high street conveyancing are also facing disproportionate impacts. In these uncertain times, the Law Society recognises the significant challenges facing so many of its members, and we are working hard to help them through this crisis. As soon as the lockdown was implemented, we moved quickly to establish a coronavirus task force to ensure that our members were adequately supported and to ensure that we are making the government aware of the needs of law firms. We set out 4 immediate priorities: looking after our members' safety, helping members keep their business going, helping members stay compliant, and protecting the rule of law. Since then, we have produced a wide range of tools and guidance for our members, and we have engaged extensively with the government to ensure our members receive the support they need. We have daily calls with the Ministry of Justice, weekly calls with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and ongoing conversations with the Treasury, the Department of Health and Social Care, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, HMRC and others. We have also had regular contact with the Shadow Lord Chancellor and Shadow Attorney General, as well as the Chair of the Justice Committee in Parliament. We have been making the case tirelessly for more support for our members, and we will continue to do so. So far, we have secured a number of positive developments for our members. Some of the things we have achieved for the benefit of small and medium-sized firms include persuading the British Business Bank to reduce its restrictive security criteria by not seeking guarantees for loans less than £250,000 and not taking security over an applicant's primary residence for larger loans. Making the case to government for an extension of the furloughing scheme to support firms' cash flow during the lockdown, which has since been accepted. Persuading the Land Registry to accept Mercury signatures following our feedback on the difficulties of obtaining wet signatures in the current circumstances. Convincing the MOJ and the SRA to allow oaths relating to commercial transactions to be sworn via video link, although appropriate record keeping will help if the oath's validity is later challenged. Ensuring that the majority of trainees and students can still sit their exams despite the SRA's initial intention to suspend these. Lobbying the government to amend the proposed emergency coronavirus legislation to allow hearings under the Extradition Act 2003 to take place temporarily via LiveLink, as well as ensuring the government understood the need for a sunset clause in the legislation. Persuading the Welsh Government to include small and medium-sized law firms within the criteria for its recently announced £100 million grant scheme for businesses. Securing amendments to the Domestic Abuse Gateway to reduce the evidence requirements. Pushing the CPS to clarify the approach for prosecution of people with impaired decision-making capacity under the Coronavirus Regulations 2020. And securing a confirmation from the government that those essential to the running of the justice system, including solicitor advocates, duty solicitors, and other similar categories, should be considered as key workers, as well as confirming they are eligible for testing. We have also influenced safety policies introduced in courts, police stations, and prisons, influenced the legal aid agency's COVID-19 policies and procedures, which have led to a series of changes, ensured that the government's business support package is developed with regard to the issues affecting our members, with some of our proposed amendments to schemes accepted, and influenced the government's guidance on residential conveyancing transactions. We are continuing to engage with the government, and we are lobbying for further measures to support our members through the crisis. Some of the priorities we are pushing for are a 50% reduction in business rates for law firms, the implementation of part-time furloughing, maintenance of the standard monthly payment at current levels for legal aid firms. We are also working closely with the government on guidance for lifting the lockdown, and we will be providing support guidance for members on how to manage and return to offices safely. And in fact, that can be found on our website. But I want to speak about that last point in a little bit more detail, as it was pertinent to do so in light of the government's roadmap that was published recently. As part of its guidance on working safely during the coronavirus outbreak, the government has published detailed guidance for people who work in or run offices, contact centres, and similar indoor environments. This guidance will apply to small firms and sole practitioners. The guidance lists out a number of practical steps for firms to take ahead of returning to the workplace. And these include conduct a risk assessment and manage risk. Look after your staff who are on site and working from home. Protect people who are at high risk and ensure you comply with measures required for staff members with protected characteristics. Put in place measures for social distancing at work by adapting workplaces and workstations, meetings, and common places. Be clear on personal protective equipment and face coverings. Minimise work-related travel and keep communicating with your staff. The Law Society is developing additional guidance for law firms on managing the return to office working, which will be published next week. This guidance will be published on our website, and I would strongly encourage you to all take a look when it has been released. At this address, on our website, you will also be able to find a wide range of guidance tools and resources covering a huge range of issues, many of which you might be encountering. If you are looking for specific help on an issue you are facing, I would recommend our Coronavirus Hub as your first port of call, which can be found on our website. I will highlight some of the resources that I imagine will be of most relevance to today's audience. We have produced an interactive tool which allows you to identify quickly what forms of financial support schemes your firm could be eligible for. We have launched a cybersecurity and fraud prevention hub to address some of the key security issues and scams that are affecting members and their clients. We have also highlighted some technological platforms that are available which can help you and your firms remain compliant with your regulatory obligations. Following the government's announcement on Wednesday that it is reopening the home buying and selling market, we have advice for conveyancers on how to advise clients safely and comply with all social distancing guidelines. We have identified some of the key issues firms may be facing in trying to renew their professional indemnity insurance and have provided some advice for firms doing so. We also have guidance for firms on what the furlough scheme involves and how you can take advantage of this. All of this guidance will be applicable to small firms, but we have also have some specific advice for them, as we know they have some unique questions on shoring up their cash flow and looking at what to do if the running of firms, of those who are running firms, get ill themselves. This is only a small taste of the guidance that is available, with plenty more specific support for different practice areas too. So I encourage you to take a look on our website. Needless to say, these are truly extraordinary times for everyone. We are all finding ourselves having to deal with difficult circumstances that none of us expected. But however long this situation lasts, rest assured that the Law Society remains here for you. We will continue to provide the advice and direct support our members need to help you weather this storm. And we will continue to make the case to the government for strong support for the legal services sector. We are keen to know if there's anything else we can do to help. So please, if you have any issues that you think we have not addressed, please raise it and by emailing us at coronavirus@lawsociety.org.uk. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And I know that people with may not know this, but the Law Society has been working its socks off. Everyone there, from staff members to council members, committee chairs, board chairs, absolutely more so than in regular times, it seems. So thank you very much for your hard work. And there will be more information about the safety at work issues with our next speaker. Not covering it a lot, but I should let you know that we have handouts on this, so you should be able to see those on your screen. There are handouts available for download, and one of those are the slides from our next guest, which is Jay Barney, who's coming up on the screen now. And it gives you places to look for the health and safety instructions. But I would like to very much thank Jay for being here with Barney HR and Employment Law. Absolutely fantastic firm for employment and HR law, and Jay has been wonderful during this time in providing resources. They have a wonderful website and newsletter that's going around, and service as well, including a hotline for the members of their service. So without further ado, I will turn it over to her because she can probably tell you so much more. Oh, before I do, you can ask questions. You have a chat screen, so if you want to ask questions of any of the panel members, please do write them. We may not get time to answer all of them, but if you start writing them in now as you think of them, we will then hopefully be able to get through all of as many as possible towards the end of this. And now I will go away and let Jay take over. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. I'm delighted to talk to you today. We help lots of law firms manage their HR issues, and there's never been as busy a time as we've had over the last few weeks, as you can imagine. One of our specialist areas is law firms, but we also deal with quite a few hospitality clients, and let me tell you, they are completely devastated by what's happening in their industry. So what I thought I would do is really just highlight to you some of the areas that we are particularly looking at the moment, and what we're answering lots of questions on. Some questions are still unanswered, and me and my team have been spending a lot of time getting to grips and interpreting some of the almost daily things that are coming out by the government and HMRC. So I think that, you know, now is the time for you and your law firms to do some workforce planning. So think about your firm as it is now. Think about how you envisage it's going to look like in the future, and start planning ahead. And I think that, you know, you could fall into one of three categories. So you might be fortunate to fall into a category where you're operating at normal or indeed better levels than normal. So if you're doing employment law, if you're doing family, you know, the expectation is that those areas will be very busy. So what you need to be doing is thinking about recruitment, getting your recruitment practices right, improving your longer term home working, because of course that's going to be with us for a lot longer. Making your workplace safe in line with the government guidelines, which Stephanie told us a bit about, and I'll talk about at the end. And getting your contracts and policies right. So those of you that aren't aware, on the 6th of April this year, there were new rules which required us to change the way in which we issue contracts of employment, and things like holiday calculations, and a number of things changed with the Good Work Plan. None of that has been put aside as a result of COVID-19, so it's really important that you get those things right, and you know, it might be a good opportunity to get all of your policies and everything looked at. You might fall into a category where you're going to see a downturn in work. So what you might think about doing is unfurloughing staff that you have furloughed. Think about maybe bringing people back on a rotation. As long as you furlough people for a period of 3 weeks or more, you can bring them back, and then you can send them back on furlough for at least 3 weeks more, so that you can have some people working and some people off, as it suits the needs of your firm. Think about variation of terms and conditions. So, you know, you may need to have people come back to work, but on different hours, or different on reduced hours and pay. So, you know, you have to consult with employees and you have to follow a process, but it is possible to do that. Are you expecting a big reduction in operations? In which case, you know, you might be looking at extending furlough, you might be looking at redundancies and restructure. Which sadly, you know, a lot of the calls that we're getting are about redundancies already. And finally, are you anticipating that your business won't survive? You know, I'm really hopeful that most people are able to keep their business going, but if not, then, you know, take some early business turnaround advice, rather than ending up in an insolvency situation. Okay, so then the furlough scheme itself. Now, most people are aware of how the furlough scheme works, and there's lots of information on the Law Society website and in other places. So I won't go into any detail about the scheme. But just to say that we now know that it's been extended to the end of October this year. We know that furloughed workers will continue to receive 80% of their salary through the government grant, subject to the £2,500 monthly cap. And we're not going to see any changes to that until the end of July. From the beginning of August, what the Chancellor has said is that they're going to allow more flexibility. So we might then be able to bring staff back to work part-time and still use the furlough scheme. Full details are going to be published at the end of May. And at the moment, you know, we just don't know the detail on that. So there have been rumours about whether the 80% contribution is going to reduce. I think it's Martin Lewis doing his thing, saying something about 60%. Well, we haven't got any information about that at the moment. So, you know, keep an eye out on the HMRC website. And then in a series of tweets talking about the revision to the scheme, the Chancellor did suggest that the government will continue to pay a proportion of furlough pay and start asking employers to share the costs with the government. And I don't know whether that's in terms of introducing the part-time and flexible furlough scheme, or whether it's going to reduce the percentage. Okay, then unfurloughing staff. So, you know, if you have furloughed staff and you think right now's the time, so for example, conveyancing firms, because you're now able to get the property market moving, you might want to bring some people back, which you can do, but make sure that you document things, make sure that you write to your employees and tell them that they'll be returning on the same terms, or indeed that they'll be returning on some altered terms if you've negotiated some altered terms. And think about the contracts that you need to issue to them to make sure that you've got a paper trail. If business hasn't picked up in a way that you'd hoped, then as I said before, you can always furlough people again. Okay, next thing to consider is redundancies. So the only thing I'm going to say on that is that normal consultation rules apply, and you must consider that, and particularly if you're making larger scale redundancies, then don't forget the collective consultation requirements, because there are heavy penalties if you don't abide by them. And we're already seeing employees really hell-bent on making claims against employers who they feel haven't followed the process. And I think as law firms in particular, you know, we need to make sure that we get our processes right. One of the questions we've been asked a lot is about making people redundant during furlough. We think that you can do that, just bearing in mind that if you put people on notice during the furlough period, you have to top up their notice pay to 100%. If you give them a redundancy payment, then you can't reclaim that under the furlough scheme, but you can recover 80% of the notice. If you give people pay in lieu of notice, then that terminates their employment straight away, and so you can't claim that notice under the furlough scheme, so just bear that in mind. Okay, next one, home working. So that's obviously been huge, and most of us have either got to grips with that anyway over the last few years, or have very quickly had to change our model so that we could get people working at home. Now we've heard, although there's nothing concrete yet, that the government is thinking about introducing an employee's right to work from home, which might form part of the government's return to work package. I didn't know this, but I read recently that the Prime Minister's manifesto pledge, one of his pledges, was in fact to make flexible working the norm. Now, I'm pretty sure he hasn't engineered the coronavirus, but it has actually aligned with one of the things he wanted to do, in that, you know, everybody's looking at working from home or working in different ways. And I personally think it's a great thing to be able to do. Home working policies, you ought to, now that the scheme's been extended to the end of October, the furlough scheme, but also it's likely that we're going to have longer term home working where we can. Don't forget to have a home working policy covering off things like insurance, the confidentiality of your data. I'm sure Peter might have something to say on that. Covering safety in the home for people who are working at home, and all sorts of other things. Okay, then managing mental health. So that's something that we, as HR, you know, in HR deal with a lot, but at the moment it's huge. So many people are struggling with their mental health, and whether they're on furlough or they're working from home or working, you know, within the workplace, the pressure's really on for lots of people. And I think you need to make sure that you're checking in with employees, make sure that, you know, you've got some empathy about the fact that people react in different ways to things that are happening. Some people have quite a sort of gung-ho attitude, I think, to lockdown, and think we should just get on with things. And lots of lawyers I've spoken to do feel like that. But then again, you've got lots of people who are extremely sensitive about the fact that, you know, there's a need to abide by the government guidance and a need to protect themselves and their families. So be mindful of that. There are lots of online tools which are great that you can use. You don't forget that if people are on furlough, you can ask them to undertake training, and I think that's a good thing to do. So, you know, you can give them online tools to check in on their mental health, to look at ways in which they can regulate what they're doing at home, and think about timekeeping, and keeping some sort of routine for people, because I think that's really important for them. If you've got a mental health first aider within your firm, as lots of us have, I'm a trained mental health first aider now, I think it's important to make sure that you liberate some time for that person to check in with staff and make sure that you're, if nothing else, protecting the firm against disability claims, more importantly, just looking after your workforce. And if somebody becomes mentally or otherwise ill, then you might consider putting them on sick leave, which is more appropriate than furloughing. Okay, and then finally, returning to work safely. So on the 11th of May, Boris Johnson said that we should return to work if we can't work from home, unless you work in a sector that's currently closed. So I thought that was interesting, because he's not saying that employees should be encouraged to work. He's saying that, you know, people should work. And I think that's our mandate for getting on with things and operating our firms. Of course, most firms won't be able to justify why somebody needs to come into work. What we're doing in our firm, and advising lots of other firms, is have a rota so that people have got some time coming into the office if they feel safe to do that, and if you've abided by the guidance on safe workplaces. So the guidance is here. I'm not going to have time to go through any of that. I think Stephanie mentioned some of the things that you can do to make sure that you're operating a safe workplace. Starting point is definitely with the risk assessment. If you've got 50 plus employees, then you have to share that risk assessment with employees. And a good way of doing it is to get that on your website or intranet. If you've got less employees, you've still got a duty to have to put in place a risk assessment. And what I'd say is that the health and safety executive are going to be doing spot checks. They now charge, I think it's £154 an hour, because they come out and do assessments themselves and checks, and the clock starts running. So you know, if they come out to you, then you'll be charged quite a lot of money if there's anything wrong with your practices. So get your health and safety sorted and correct, and follow those government guidelines, which you'll see on my slide, some of the more practical things. And I think on my final slide, you'll see that I've screenshotted the new poster. So as we're supposed to have the health and safety poster up in our workplaces, there is now a COVID-19 poster, and I think it's just good to have that up in the workplace to make sure that you and your staff have a look at it and say, right, we've done this, we feel that we've done what we can to provide a safe working environment for those employees that we want working within our workplace rather than at home. Okay, so if you've got, I think that's all I've got time for, but if you've got any questions at all, you can stay in touch with us. We have very regular updates on everything to do with health and safety, HR and employment law. Follow us on social media. And as Heather had said, if you want to submit any questions, I'll try and deal with them now if there's time. And if not, then I'm happy to follow up later and give you any guidance that I can. Thanks.
Excellent, Jay. Thank you so very much. And for anybody trying to write down really quickly what those references are, don't worry about it. These slides are all part of a handout, which you can download as a PDF. That's been really helpful. And we do have some questions coming in for you. So if you hang around, we will be able to send some of those through. And whatever ones we can't answer, ones that might be a little bit more niche or complex, I will send them your way. You've got an excellent staff who are able to answer quite a few, if not all of these questions for people. All right, so next we're going to shift bases to tech, and we have, of course, Peter Wright with Digital Law UK, also involved with the Law Society of England and Wales as a council member and member of the board. So I will now pass it to you. Oh, a really quick point of order. There have been one or two people who said they've had trouble hearing. If you are having trouble hearing through the online, you can phone the number that is given on the registration confirmation, and you'll be able to listen to the audio through your phone. So if you're not hearing the audio through your device, through the device that you're watching this on, just call through and you'll be able to hear the audio on there. All right, now handing over to Peter.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. What I want to do this afternoon is give you a quick run through on a few issues around the technology that we've all started to rely on very heavily during this period of lockdown. There's basically two strands that I want to very quickly run through, and I've only got a few minutes, so it is going to be just a very high level, but I just want to highlight a few of the things that we need to think about when it comes to not just using technology during this lockdown, but I think there's also been a the fact that firms have had to embrace technology very quickly and very rapidly in March, sometimes without having the chance to really question or look at the market in any great depth. I think there's going to be a push to then continue to use technology as we now come out of the lockdown, and indeed going into the future. I think we might be doing more meetings like this using things like webinar software and virtual video conferencing, rather than perhaps having quite as many in-person meetings as we used to have. And also I think we'll end up doing a little bit more working from home perhaps as well, because certainly if the polling's anything to go by, everyone seems to now like the fact that they're sort of at home an awful lot more, and suddenly the idea of a long commute and an hour sat in an office is not quite as appealing as it once was. So what I'd like to do is just, if we can start off with the next slide please, just to give you a quick run through on a few issues. First of all, security. There has been a massive, cybersecurity is always a major issue for law firms anyway. We have huge volumes of very important data, very sensitive data, and therefore it's crucial that we are protecting that as far as we can. But unfortunately, hackers out there know that we have a lot of this sensitive data, everything from medical records through to in certain instances, things like criminal records, people's financial information, all that estates and trusts work and the conveyancing, not to mention all of the commercial and confidential data that we hold for our clients. So we are, as a profession, seen as a rich source of information, and therefore we are a target. And let's face it, of our 10,000 plus law firms in England and Wales, not each one of those firms is going to have the resources of, say, a Big Four high street bank. So we've got to think about that. We have to think about the fact that we can't throw massive technical resources at things, but we still have to demonstrate to regulators, be it the SRA or the ICO, that we are looking after and protecting data. So we have to think about the threats. And we've always been conscious, I think, increasingly of issues around phishing. And guess what? During this time of the lockdown and the pandemic, there have been specific attacks focused on trying to make us think that we're hearing from banks or agencies or the government, when in fact it is hackers impersonating them. There was something like a 400% increase of coronavirus-related hacking attempts to hack via phishing in March alone, and that's probably gone up a lot since then during April. And what these people are trying to do is basically to sort of prey on our unwariness. If you receive an email purporting to come from Her Majesty's Treasury saying, please click here to access your emergency government bounce back loan, if you don't otherwise know, is this genuine or not, you might genuinely click on that thinking, oh, this is how I'm able to access finance for my firm. So it's important to basically question an awful lot of the traffic that we do receive. If it's coming from someone that we don't communicate with on a regular basis, very often it's best to exercise caution first, and then prove that you can definitely use it, open it, use it later on down the line. I've just got there a couple of our examples of phishing scams. I mean, it's well known that, for example, hackers have impersonated banks and impersonated government agencies before. HMRC is a common one to try and spoof. It's funny how many people will click on something if it says click here to receive your tax rebate, for example. In this instance, hackers have tried to prey on our wariness, and in many instances our fear over the current lockdown. So they've been sending out emails purporting to come from the World Health Organization, purporting to come from the NHS, for example, click here to access your test, all things like that. And if you don't know to question it, you might click on that thinking, oh, right, this is how I'm actually able to access the information or the things that I need. It's also not a matter of just being via email. Be wary of text messages purporting to come again from banks or other agencies, and indeed potentially people connecting with you on social media. A big way that very often now hackers will try and get into your sort of circle of contacts is to actually appear like a genuine contact, getting in touch with you on LinkedIn. So be wary of a connection on LinkedIn that invites to connect with you who you don't know, who then starts to engage in a message dialogue back and forth with you on LinkedIn Messenger, who could then provide a link or an attachment that, if you were to click on it, would cause significant damage to your system. That's a favorite trick, unfortunately, that they've got, because of course if you're communicating on LinkedIn Messenger or Facebook Messenger or any other instant messaging system, you're circumventing all of those technological and sometimes very expensive security measures that you might have on your email. What's the way around that? If you do end up with a dialogue with someone on a messenger system, say, this is great, can you please get in touch with me on via email, and give them an email address and get them onto your secure confidential messaging system via your business email account instead, rather than relying on the instant messaging system. So if we can click onto the next slide, please. And this should now take us into a few more examples. Risks working from home. The majority of us have become remote workers, whether we liked it or not, over the course of the last couple of months, and there are issues we need to think of. Very often we're working from home, and I know a few colleagues who've struggled to find just a quiet, secure space where they can work quietly. You know, it's not necessarily the most confidential place if you're sat at the dining room table trying to use that as your office. If then your family members and roommates are having to listen to you make confidential phone calls, potentially access your confidential information on your laptop, you know, whether they want to hear that information or not, or see it, they're going to see it because they've got no option. So we need to think about the fact that that's not a great setup at the moment. It's certainly not great if you are then working from home in future and there's a possibility of friends of other family members or friends of housemates who could potentially be coming along and also then seeing you working confidentially at home. Be careful with Wi-Fi networks, that you've only got access to those networks to your trusted family members. I say this because very often we've got some family members. It could be that you've got teenager or adult children with they might invite friends over who then want access to the Wi-Fi network so that they can use online gaming or exchange things on social media. And of course, the risk there is that you're potentially giving access to your Wi-Fi network to someone who knows an awful lot more about how that Wi-Fi works than potentially you do. So we always recommend to people, try and split your Wi-Fi network, have a password protected network for you to use for your work activities, for your internet enabled devices, be it your smart speaker or your any kitchen paraphernalia. We're getting more smart fridges and things now, let alone smart TVs. Have those on a secure network, and then have a guest network that you can then give to anyone else who's going to be coming into the property. And that means then that at least, hopefully, they can't then be able to get into that router, get into that network and potentially access your confidential information. But we should also be conscious of the fact that in our very compact urban areas, if you're in an apartment, in a flat, you might find that even though you're working quite quietly and efficiently away, you might find that your wonderful high definition 4K OLED screen can be seen really clearly by the people watching just over the road, for example. Some flats are very close together, and sometimes you find that you can be overlooked and seen rather clearly, and you'd be surprised at the clarity of the information on those screens. It was only a few months back that students at a law school were able to see from across the quadrangle all of the confidential information and exam questions that their lecturers were putting together in their offices only a few yards away, but they could see it in perfect clarity because of the wonderful quality of the screens they were using. We'd certainly recommend, if possible, using a VPN when you work from home. Many security packages will now offer these to you. It's definitely worth using those. There are free ones around as well, but they aren't necessarily as secure as we might want. Sometimes they provide data to advertisers. That's the reason why it's free, is because that data is then going through to an advertiser who can then serve adverts on you. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I just wanted to talk quickly about some of the procurement decisions we might have made quite rapidly upon entering lockdown. Many firms will have had to invest in video conferencing software, webinar software. You may have suddenly had to think, oh, we need to now get a new case management system that allows us to work more efficiently from home. You might have had to invest in time recording systems, other bits of technology to help you adapt to the fact that suddenly, rather than having one or two people working out of the office, it's been the majority of people outside of the office. And this has meant that sometimes we haven't necessarily done as much due diligence on the procurement of certain systems as we would have done if we had many, many months to sit and think, right, what system do we need for the purpose that we need to carry out? There simply hasn't been time to sit there and wade through 15 pages of terms and conditions, for example, as we ordinarily would as lawyers, to make sure that we are then satisfied with all of the different terms in there. And I just want to use the example here of Zoom video conferencing. Suddenly, you know, the idea of being on a Zoom call has entered common parlance. Everyone's using it for work, also for social drinks in the evening, and it has become a system that people all over the world have been relying on. And while I think it's great it's very intuitive, it's very easy to use, it's great for webinars like this, it's great for having lots of people on at one time and being able to see all the people who are there, great. But the risk with Zoom is that it does have, it has had a few problems. You may have heard of Zoom bombing, this phenomenon where unauthorized people were joining meetings and being able to sometimes share silly things, disrupt the meeting, make loud noises. I've heard of council planning meetings on Zoom being disrupted by Zoom bombers. I even actually attended, ironically, a data protection and cybersecurity virtual conference a few weeks back on Zoom, and yes, it was indeed Zoom bombed by someone that they then had to virtually throw out of the event. Not ideal. Now, I think it's fine for doing your online events. Where I think we have a problem potentially with Zoom is that I don't think it's necessarily great if we're using it to deliver legal services. So if you were planning on having a virtual conference between, it could be your fee earners and say a barrister and an expert and the client, not necessarily best for that, not just because of that risk around Zoom bombing. There are a few other things. One problem they've had is that it turned out that some of their servers were based in China. So even if people on the call weren't located in China, the call information was going through China, issues there around government surveillance potentially, meaning that we can't guarantee that our call is entirely secure. It could be being looked at by the Chinese state and other actors there. There were also issues with call data being shared with Facebook and other platforms. And then there's also been the fact that when the management there have made assurances and said, oh, this is a great system to use and we're doing everything we can to make it safe and secure. Well, it turns out that they've been saying that a lot this year. They were saying it a lot in 2019 as well. They're even now facing a class action from their own investors, who in 2019 were told Zoom is end-to-end encrypted, it's nice and secure, and then it turns out that in fact it wasn't. So their own shareholders are planning a class action because they were given assurances that weren't true. So I think that if we add all of that together, my personal view is that if we as lawyers want to show that we are looking after our confidential client data, we need to use platforms that we can trust. So we tend to recommend, as we've put there with the green tick, systems like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, Cisco WebEx, Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, all of those. Yes, they are premium products, but they also provide a more secure working environment. And it just means that you then, as lawyers, can say, look, we can demonstrate we've thought about these risks, and this is the system that we are using. And that applies for many other things as well. Dropbox, WhatsApp, the free versions of both, and other systems that might be free to use. Sometimes it basically highlights the fact that those systems are not necessarily the best for us to carry out our legal, confidential and privileged work. So those are the main messages I wanted to get across for you this afternoon. If we could just click on to the next couple of slides. You can take a look at these slides later on, and you can download them. There's just the contact information at the end there. If you've got any questions about what we've discussed and also further source of information, please do feel free to contact us there. Email address and information there for Digital Law UK. We've got lots of information on our website that might be helpful. And also you can access, there is a very helpful practice note from the Law Society that we've put into the handouts for this webinar as well, so you can look through that in a little bit more detail. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that helpful. And I'll now pass back to Heather. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we do have some questions that have come in. And before I start pulling those through, and thank you very much for everyone who's done, we also have some polls that are going to be launched here. And I'm going to ask the wizard behind the curtain, hopefully, to launch those for us. They're just some questions that might help us understand where you guys are. So if I can have all the panelists come back on. the screen for me so we can start with the question and answers. And if I can ask my magic wizard behind the curtain to launch those polls for us while we're chatting, that would be great. Okay, so these polls are going on. Let's take a look at some questions, first of all, for Peter. In regards to Zoom in particular, they are saying that they are improving on their security. Is that something that you see happening? Is that something we can trust now?
Good question. I think that they do appear to be making efforts. I've heard anecdotally, I read an interview that their chief executive gave where he said, look, we're currently stopping all of the sort of performance enhancing updates and focusing solely on making our product safe and secure. My concern, though, is that they have a track record of having said this in the past and given assurances, and then it's turned out not necessarily to be true. So I still tend to put a bit of a question mark, an asterisk next to Zoom, certainly when it comes to using it for us to carry out work as lawyers. So speaking to our clients, discussing confidential, privileged information in that manner. I'd say, look, it's still fine for, say, internal discussions or for training events like this, where you might be speaking to people online and using it as a substitution for doing your networking and business development. I would still tend to put a bit of a question mark next to it, though, for doing our legal-based work for that reason, until we can get basically a bulletproof account to say, yeah, this is definitely now safe and secure to use. Here are the standards. Here's the encryption. Here's where our servers are. The fact they've not been able to confirm that clearly in the past has been a bit of a concern. So the jury is still out, okay. I think, at the moment.
Great, I think that's a full answer. What about, there's a question about using Teams for business.
Teams is definitely a secure product to use. You've probably seen their advert at the moment. It even finishes on TV where it says safe and secure. I wonder what they're trying to get across there. The only thing I would say with Teams is that, having used it myself to chair meetings with 26 people on at one time, do that. It's not necessarily the most user-friendly piece of kit. You can tell it's basically designed and built by engineers for engineers, but once you get used to it, it's still quite effective for being able to do those sort of bigger meetings and discussions that we would ordinarily have been able to do around a conference room table, and instead do them online.
Okay, great. We actually have quite a few questions for Jay. Very popular. There are two sides of the same question, I think. How would you deal with employees refusing to come to work, citing 44 ERA as justification? And then on the other side, what if you're an employer who doesn't feel safe coming back to work?
So, well, I think there were two questions along similar lines there. So, what do you do about employees who you want to come back into work, into the workplace, but who don't feel safe to do so? So, for those that aren't employment lawyers, Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act is about protection for employees who feel that their workplace isn't safe, so they're in danger of or at threat of serious or imminent danger, is what the wording of the act of the section says. I think my view is the starting point. You see, lots of lawyers don't like to accept that actually it's very, very possible to operate most firms remotely, and I think the last few weeks have sort of proved that. So first of all, you've got to ask yourself the question, well, is there a reason why people can't work from home? If the answer to that is, well, no, not really, then I think you've got to abide by the government guidance and provide the best tools that you can for people to work remotely, except for some limited services they offer where they might not be able to. If the answer is no, we can't work from home because the nature of our work is such that we have to be in an office or elsewhere, then I think that what you need to do is demonstrate that you've done what your duty as an employer is to provide a safe working environment. The guidance on one of my slides is the working safely during coronavirus guidance that's just come out. and there are 8 sector specific guides. So if you have a look, Peter, I think, had asked a question. If you have a look at the offices and contact centres, that then breaks down the kinds of things that you need to put in place, including inviting customers into your office and how you limit that and how you deal with that if you feel you have to.
Okay, can you also answer quickly, there's a question on redundancies during furlough. So again, you did talk about redundancies, and if anyone missed that, there is the ability to go to your website. I believe there's some information on the furlough information and redundancies. But a specific question is about redundancies during furlough. Do you have to pay the full pay during the notice period when you are still claiming back 80% under the JRS?
Yes, so if you give notice of redundancy, so say for example you had to give 4 weeks notice during the furlough period to an employee, if you keep them on notice, effectively working during their notice but not working because they're on furlough, you can claim back 80%, and you're only going to incur the cost of 20% because you have to top it up to the full salary. If you terminate their contract and give them pay in lieu of notice, that's a bad idea if they're on furlough, because you won't be able to claim that back. And then the element of the redundancy payment itself, you can't claim that back on the furlough. So I hope that's clear, but if it's not, whoever's asked the question, drop me an email and I'll explain it.
Okay, great. And this last question, I think, these last set of questions, I think could actually be useful to get information from Stephanie, Peter, and Jay. So as you wish. It's about what guarantees you have for people with training contracts. Also, what about students who don't yet have training contracts, and what should they be doing? These are a lot of those people who are either new to this legal market or just coming into it. And what advice or information do you have for these people?
Should I go first? So the advice in terms of those who already have training contracts, and depending on where you're at with that training contract, you should communicate with the firm, with the training principal, the organisation, to find out exactly what is proposed. And you know, whilst we expect firms, organisations, and so forth to honour training contracts, we've come across a number of instances where qualification dates have been extended, whether whilst you're on furlough, whether that time counts towards qualification and so forth. There is the SRA on their website has a number of Q&As that answers different types of scenarios, but in the absence of that information being there that relates to your specific circumstances, then do communicate with your training principal to understand your particular position. In terms of those who do not have already have a training contract, there are a number of virtual schemes, virtual work experiences going on. Continue to apply, continue to think about the skills and experience that you may need to have or equip yourself with in order to make yourself stand out. We appreciate that these are challenging circumstances we find ourselves in, and going forward, we just don't know how this is going to pan out in terms of whether it means that there's going to be a reduction in training contracts and deferrals of a qualification gap. We are continuing to monitor the situation very carefully and ask that where there are unusual circumstances, or where perhaps you feel that your circumstance is different, that you contact us and let us know, so we can obviously take that forward where we can.
Excellent, thank you so very much. Peter?
Yeah, just one bit. I suppose thinking in particular of those who haven't yet got a training contract or are yet to start a training contract, it might be a bit concerned. In particular, those who were doing, say, an LLB or doing their degree and have then finished it 2/3 of the way through their final year and wondering, well, great, what do I do now? A few things to think about are particularly given as well, we've got the sort of not just the issues with regards to this, but also with regards to the SQE, Solicitors Qualifying Exam, that's being introduced next year. And if you're just thinking, well, what exactly am I best off doing? One option to perhaps just do a little bit of research on while you've got the opportunity now is to potentially look at the fact that not only are solicitor apprenticeships available for those who haven't even started their degree, but for those who finished a degree, you can then still do a graduate apprenticeship. This means that you end up then continuing with a law school, and these are available through, for example, BPP, and I think the University of Law as well are putting together a similar scheme, if not already. And the idea is that you can then join a phased program. It will include you being able to do your SQE 1 and 2. It will include being able to give you tuition in a virtual learning environment, quite similar to what we're doing now. And it will then ensure that at least you have that certainty of being able to think, right, well, okay, I do this for a few years, I complete my SQE, I'm qualified at the end of it, and then you're able to go into the market then. And in the meantime, if you can get placements and things, absolutely fantastic. Another potential source of experience, I mean, let's face it, it's difficult to get legal work experience anyway, has always been a problem. One potential solution is the European Law Students Association are currently offering virtual placements. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but the idea is that you can still observe the lockdown, you can work virtually from home, but you're then able to get at least some experience working with a firm. That gives you expertise you can put onto your CV, and hopefully will give you that little bit of an advantage when it comes to then going on to the market later on.
Okay, excellent. We're now seeing some of the results of the polls that have gone out. I'm happy to see that there is quite a few, almost 50% of those who responded are able to show that they are able to do some work from home. In terms of the support that the government, that people are getting from the government, it does look like a lot of people are taking advantage of the furlough support to pay staff, which is excellent. I think it's interesting that doesn't seem to be as much take up on some of the other bits of relief, and I may be doing some webinars later on different ways to access that, because I know some people have had difficulty accessing some of these schemes when they really have the right to them, or they are maybe skeptical about applying for a bounce back loan, saying, you know, it's just a loan, I'll have to pay it back, and concerns about that. And so I definitely will look at putting together a webinar on that. Unfortunately, we are getting close to ending time, so I'll hopefully have the results of the last two polls put up here so we can see those. One is, it sounds really good. It looks like there are local resources that are reaching out to local and national resources that are reaching out specific to lawyers, so that helps. But I'd also like to see us reaching out and seeing how we can help each other. That would be good. If you've received help from this, that's fantastic. If you still have a lot more questions, please let us know. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, at Anson Evaluate. But also make sure you're emailing some questions. There were some really good questions that came in that can be directed to that coronavirus at thelawsociety.org.uk, particularly around like the overdraft issues. Also more specifically advice on clients coming into the office and how to set up safe parameters on that. Make sure you download the handouts. And let me know also if there are things that you want me to do. There's only so much we can do in an hour, but I will do as much as I can for you in the future within those 1 hour a week. You can email events@ansonevaluate.com to let us know what you would like to see also, and if you'd like to be added to our notice emails for new events that are coming out. I thank you all very much. Thank you very much for my panelists. And one final note, this will be on demand at some point, so you will be able to see this if you missed out or weren't able to hear or missed a few things along the way. It will be available. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.